We'll take a look at today's papers and we're joined by Dr Liam Lenten, sports economist from La Trobe University. Liam, good morning.
Morning, Virginia. Nice to be with you again.
Well, given that, sports is definitely sort of, part of what you look at, the Melbourne Cup can't be too far away from your attention.
I guess it's no accident that I'm on here on this particular morning. Always a big story in the follow-up on the first Wednesday of November every year. And certainly one thing that really kind of surprised me was that in the run-up to the Melbourne Cup, there was a lot of stuff going around about the impending international invasion and the domination. So it proved to be the case yesterday. None of the Australian starters came close to winning. But it seems that most of the dailies have chosen not to really run with a lot of that stuff this morning, instead focusing on the standard stories like the close finish. In this particular case, the Canberra Times has run with that on page 1, and a couple of the others have also chosen to run with that. There have been some stories on the substitution of the jockey from the suspended Craig Williams to Christophe Lemaire, also the international guests and the standard fashions on the field angle as well. Patrick Smith had an article about the international domination, but that was just about the only thing that I could find.
Yeah, but I mean, the result spoke for itself. French jockey.
It was pretty emphatic, Michael, and I guess a lot of people lament that it's such an international domination in the modern day. But then again, sports like tennis went through this, let's say, 30 years ago, when all of a sudden we went from a situation where Australian players were very dominant at the Australian Open, and we haven't seen a single male winner since 1976 now, and it's a similar story in the women's draw.
I reckon it's a classic Australian whinge, this situation. For years, people were banging on about how the Melbourne Cup has to become international and we're trying to attract the international players, and wouldn't it be good? It'll put us on the world stage. And so it comes to pass. And now it's whinge, whinge, whinge. The foreign invaders, they're taking the cup. Why can't Australian horses get a berth? It's hard for us to get in. At that point, I always think of the famous Australian story about the Wydinia, was it the Wydinia Council, I think it was? Why didn't you build it out of wood? Why didn't you build it out of brick? Why didn't you build it up the road?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very good Australian gag.
It's an oldie, but a goodie.
But it's exactly the case, isn't it?
A classic case of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
we've got this international domination, and I guess we've just got to remind ourselves that the alternative is to, let's say, halve the prize money, and that'll turn the international prospectors off the case. But then
and then
again,
the headlines would be "Our Cup neglected."
Well, or something like that. It would risk sliding slowly into sporting oblivion.
We were talking a bit earlier about how the papers covered it, and we could get the Canberra Times front page back up again, because it had
intriguing.
It certainly had the photo, which is the photo finish, the photo pixel finish,
now,
but that is going to be a headspin to a lot of people, because it is obviously taken from the other side of the winning post.
Which is fine, and often that will give you the closest angle, because of course the winning horse did come up on the inside, so it makes sense to do that. But it's a bit of a head spinner, because of course the two states, or north of the border, far away from Melbourne, they go the other way around the track.
Well, I never thought of that.
You look at it and think, hang on a minute, they've moved the Melbourne Cup to Sydney.
We're trained observers here, so just stick with us.
Well, no, look, obviously it's a huge story here in Melbourne, but it was definitely something that was bandied across the front page of all of the dailies across the nation.
All right, now let's move on to The Age, and of course the other big story of the day usually is a big story, and that of course is whether the Reserve Bank Board, after it meets, decides to cut or not cut rates. Well,
just acting as a segue first of all towards that, Virginia, a lot of the front pages also ran with, in addition to something about the Melbourne Cup, something else along the lines of, I think Everyone's a Winner was a shot from the Adelaide Advertiser, and the Hobart Mercury ran with something similar, Cup Double, I think it was. And
more money to lose on the punt.
Well, yeah, that's right. We may have lost on the punt, but gained on interest rates. But certainly, again, on the first Wednesday of, well, most months indeed, in terms of the RBA board meeting, on this particular occasion, they've chosen to slash interest, or the official cash rate, by 25 basis points. Look, there's various angles on this across the different papers, but certainly the one I've chosen to go with from The Age was more the focus on who is passing the rate cut on.
Which is usually the angle, and The Age also picks up with what most newspapers do after any rate movement, going through the tables, looking at your mortgage and how much you'll either benefit or lose.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that never ceases to amaze me, Michael, is how unilaterally or unambiguously positive all the papers are about any rate cut, as if to say everyone's a winner. But from a personal point of view, this is purely self-interested. As someone who's a net saver and who's felt that I've been frozen out of the buyer's market, at least for now, I don't want this. I want interest rates to rise. But it seems that all of the print media sources tend to go with the contradictory angle. In fact, a lot of my second-year undergrads have this look on amazement on their face when I tell them that an interest rate decrease has both winners and losers.
Yeah.
It's like they've been brainwashed by the major dailies.
Liam, I think that's a really important point, and it also astonishes me repeatedly in relation to our political leadership on both sides, that part of the argument has simply gone by the by. And I don't know why self-funded retirees don't gather their voices together in a much louder call and start saying, hang on a minute, exactly the point that you make, that we need decent interest rates in order to get some sort of return on our investment.
Especially when so many are piling out of the stock market for good reason into fixed-term deposits.
Precisely. When you have, it's sort of a bit of contradiction. You've got a government saying there is no stronger banking sector in the world than Australia. You can trust the banks, you can invest there. Well, what's the return on investing there? Nothing at the moment. Where would you like me to take a risk with my, hard-earned nest egg that was actually, bashed around by the stock market fall? So, Liam, I think it's a very important point. I'd like to hear you make it more often.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, Virginia, if all these self-funded retirees choose to go down to Parliament House with placards, perhaps I'll be joining them.
Well, I think that's it's a really interesting movement waiting to find its voice. And once the baby boomers start joining that or forming that lobby group, then I reckon you'll see a change in rhetoric.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Speaking of self-interest, reigning supreme. Now let's go to the Australian, which continues the Qantas fallout coverage this morning.
Yeah, and the focus now, Michael, is run its course on towards the fallout now that normal operations should be back to normal today. The Oz story that we see here is focusing on the who knew what when angle and the political discourse between Gillard and Abbott. But yeah, there are various angles on this particular story. Obviously, the coverage was very unified on the weekend when it was just more about the shock and horror of the decision by senior Qantas management. But it turns out that even though it's in all the papers today, that there's no single kind of unified angle on the actual story. They're all chosen to go in their own different directions. So I've just chosen the Oz one at random almost.
Do you think this one will run? The government was trying to make hay with it in question time yesterday, but what did you guys know over there? Will that have any impact out there?
Possibly, Virginia, but then again, it ends up morphing into a story that's not so much about Qantas at all. So it may be that it gets traction over the next few days, but if so, it may end up being a story that's barely recognisable by the weekend compared with what it was last weekend. Yeah,
or perhaps one that's known just inside the Beltway in Canberra.
Yeah. On a personal note, I'll just say that my girlfriend is flying through Qantas from Buenos Aires tonight, so I'm just very happy that the fallout has gone to that level by now.
And she's coming home. Good to see you, Liam.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thanks, Liam. To the sport headlines now, and Guy Stainer joins us this morning. Guy, lots of sore heads in Melbourne this morning after the big race.
Well, I imagine so. We'll have a chance to catch up with Christophe Lemaire, the jockey of the Melbourne Cup winning rider, a little